Caves in Skyrim are supposed to be simple. You go in, clear out enemies, grab some loot, and move on. Most of the time, you know exactly what you're getting into. But some caves don't follow that pattern. Some of them feel wrong the moment you step inside. Not because they're harder, but because of what's in them. The atmosphere, the details, the things you start to notice the deeper you go. And by the time you understand what you've walked into, it's already left an impression. These aren't just dangerous caves. They're the ones that stick with you. The ones that tell a story you weren't expecting. The ones that feel heavier than they should. And the ones that turn a simple exploration into something a lot more unsettling than you signed up for. Tolvold's Cave doesn't feel like a place you're meant to visit. It feels like a place people tried to escape from and never could. From the moment you step inside, there's a weight to it that goes beyond the usual cave atmosphere. It's not just dark or dangerous, it feels abandoned, in a very specific way. Like whatever happened here pushed everything to a breaking point and then left it frozen in that state. The layout itself reinforces this. It isn't a clean, linear dungeon. It twists, branches, loops back on itself, creating a sense of disorientation that builds the longer you stay. You're not just moving forward, you're navigating something that feels unstable, like the cave doesn't want to be understood. That confusion ties directly into the story behind it. Tolvold's Cave is most closely associated with the Lost Expedition, searching for a crown, led by explorers who believed they could uncover something valuable deep within its chambers. On paper, it's a familiar Skyrim setup. Adventurers chasing treasure, venturing into unknown territory, expecting danger, but ultimately confident in their ability to overcome it. But the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just a failed expedition. It was a collapse. The journals scattered throughout the cave tell the story piece by piece, and what they reveal is far more unsettling than a simple defeat. The explorers didn't just run into enemies and lose. They began to turn on each other. Paranoia set in, trust broke down. The pressure of being trapped in such a confusing and closed environment began to distort their thinking. They started to suspect betrayal, to question motives, to see threats where there might not have been any. And once that shift happens, there's no coming back from it. The cave didn't just kill them, it changed them. That's what makes this cave feel so traumatic compared to other locations. It isn't just about external danger, it's about internal collapse. The environment itself becomes part of the threat. The twisting paths, the lack of clarity, the sense of being lost even when you're moving forward. It all contributes to the same pressure that the expedition experienced. You're not just reading about their descent, you're moving through it. The enemies reinforce this in a very distinct way. Falmer inhabit the cave, and their presence adds another layer to the unease. They're not just hostile, they're adapted to this kind of environment. They move through it with ease, navigating the same confusing layout that disorientates you. That contrast makes every encounter feel more uneven. You're reacting, trying to understand where you are and what's around you, while they operate with complete familiarity. And it doesn't stop there. Charles roam the deeper sections, adding a more visceral kind of threat. Their movement, their sounds, the way they emerge from the darkness, it all contributes to a sense that the cave isn't just inhabited, but alive in a way that works against you. The further in you go, the less control you feel like you have. Encounters don't feel contained, they feel like interruptions in something larger, something that exists independently of your own presence. That lack of control mirrors the story of the expedition perfectly. They came in with a goal, a clear objective, a sense of direction, and they lost all of it. The cave stripped that away piece by piece until all that was left was confusion and suspicion. Even the pacing of the cave contributes to this feeling. It's not a quick experience, it stretches on, with multiple sections that feel similar enough to blur together but different enough to keep you uncertain. There's no clear rhythm to it, no sense of progression that reassures you that you're getting closer to the end. Instead, it feels like you're moving through layers of the same space, each one slightly more disorienting than the last. That repetition creates a kind of fatigue, not just for the character, but for you as the player. And that fatigue is important, because it mirrors what the explorers must have felt. The longer they stayed, the harder it became to maintain clarity, to trust each other, to stay grounded in reality. The cave doesn't challenge you, it wears you down. By the time you reach the deeper sections where the crown of Barentia fragment lies, the significance of the treasure itself starts to feel secondary. It's still the objective, still the reason you're there, but it doesn't carry the same weight it might have at the start. Because everything you've experienced along the way reframes it. This wasn't worth it, not for them, and arguably not for you either. That realization is what makes the cave linger in your memory. It's not just another dungeon you cleared. It's a place where the story and the environment align in a way that reinforces each other. The confusion you feel isn't just gameplay, it's part of the narrative. The enemies aren't just obstacles, they're part of the ecosystem that contributed to the expedition's failure. Everything works together, and it all points in the same direction. This is what happens when control is lost, when direction fades, when isolation turns inward. That sense of collapse is made even more intense by just how hostile Tolvold's cave actually is, not just in design but in what inhabits it. This isn't a cave where danger comes in predictable waves. It feels layered, relentless, and constantly shifting. As you move through its different sections, the threats don't stay consistent, and that unpredictability adds to the pressure. You're not adapting to one type of enemy, you're constantly readjusting, never fully settling into a rhythm. Near the outer sections and higher elevations, the presence of ice wraiths immediately set the tone. They're not grounded enemies, they move erratically, almost bending, almost blending into the cold air itself, making them difficult to track and even harder to anticipate. Fighting them doesn't feel controlled, it feels reactive, like you're trying to hit something that doesn't fully exist in the same space as you. That alone creates tension early on, because it breaks the usual expectation of how encounters should feel. Then the cave shifts, frost trolls begin to appear, and with them comes a completely different kind of threat. Where ice wraiths are evasive and disorienting, frost trolls are direct and overwhelming. Their strength forces you into immediate high-pressure combat. They don't give you time to think, to plan, to recover. And in a cave that already feels confusing and enclosed, that kind of brute force becomes even more oppressive. You're not just fighting the enemy, you're fighting the space around you, trying to manage positioning in an environment that doesn't cooperate. Snow bears add another layer to this hostility. They're not as fast as trolls, but they are persistent, durable, and unpredictable in their own way. Their presence reinforces the idea that this cave isn't a controlled dungeon, it's an ecosystem. Different threats occupy different spaces, and moving through it feels like stepping into territories that weren't meant for you. And then there are the ghosts. This is where the cave's hostility shifts from physical to psychological. The spirits of the dead explorers don't just exist as enemies, they exist as reminders. They're not random, they're tied directly to the story, to the people who came here for the same reason you did and never made it out. Fighting them doesn't feel like clearing obstacles, it feels like confronting the aftermath of everything you've been reading about. They linger, they appear in spaces where the story starts to come together, reinforcing the idea that the cave didn't just kill these people, it trapped them. Their presence blurs the line between past and present. You're not just exploring what happened, you're standing in it, surrounded by it, forced to engage with it directly. And because of that, every encounter starts to feel heavier. You're not just progressing through enemies, you're moving through layers of failure, of desperation, of people who reached the same point you're at and couldn't go any further. That's what makes the hostility of Tolvold's cave so effective. It's not just constant, it's varied, unpredictable, and tied directly to the story. There's no moment where you feel fully in control, no point where the cave becomes manageable. Every new section introduces something different, something that forces you to adjust, to stay alert, to keep moving even when the environment itself feels like it's working against you. And when you combine that with everything else, the confusion, the isolation, the story of the expedition falling apart, it stops feeling like its standard dungeon entirely. Compared to other caves in Skyrim, which often focus on a single threat or a clear objective, Tolvold's cave feels layered. It's not just about fighting your way through, it's about understanding what happened, and more importantly, how it happened. The game doesn't spell it out for you. It gives you fragments, journals, environmental details, the placement of bodies, and leaves you to connect to them. And once you do, it changes how the entire cave feels, because you're no longer just exploring, you're retracing, following the same path, seeing the same signs, recognizing the same turning points that led to the expedition's collapse. And that creates a kind of tension that doesn't rely on surprise or difficulty. It relies on recognition, on the slow realization that you're walking through a pattern that's already been played out, that someone else made these choices, took these paths, pushed forward despite the warning signs, and it didn't end well. That's what makes Torvald's Cave one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. Not because it's the hardest, not because it's the most dangerous in a traditional sense, but because it's one of the few places where the danger isn't just something you fight. It's something you build over time. A loss of clarity, a loss of control, a slow shift from purpose to confusion. And by the time you leave, you don't feel like you've completed something. You feel like you've come out of something that wasn't just about survival, but about holding on to your sense of direction long enough to make it back out. And knowing that not everyone who went in managed to do the same. Movarth's Lair doesn't feel like a place you discover. It feels like a place you're led to after already knowing something is wrong. By the time you even approach the cave, the tone has already been set by Morthal itself. A town weighed down by suspicion, quiet fear, and a tragedy that no one fully understands at first. The burned house, the missing answers, the uneasy conversations, it all points towards something hidden, something operating just out of sight. And when Movarth's Lair finally comes into focus, it doesn't feel like a reveal, it feels like a confirmation. The entrance alone sets the tone. It's not dramatic or imposing, but it feels concealed in a deliberate way, tucked into the marshland as if it's meant to be overlooked. There's no sense of grandeur, no indication that something powerful resides within. Just a quiet opening that leads into something far more controlled than it appears from the outside. And that control is what defines the entire experience. Because this isn't just a cave, it's a system. From the moment you step inside, the layout makes that clear. The tunnels aren't chaotic or purely natural, they feel structured, almost intentional. Paths lead into one another with a sense of purpose. And the more you go, it feels like you're moving through a space that has been shaped, not just occupied. This isn't a temporary hideout. It's a place that has been maintained, expanded, and used over time. And that's where the unease starts to build, because places like this don't exist without direction, without someone at the center of it all. Movarth himself is that center, and his presence defines everything about the cave, even before you reach him. He isn't just another vampire hiding in the dark. He's been here for a long time, operating quietly, building something beneath the surface of Morthal without drawing attention. His influence extends beyond the cave itself, reaching into the town through manipulation, control, and careful positioning. That's what makes this cave different from others. It's not isolated, it's connected. The vampires inside aren't just enemies, they're part of something organized. They move with purpose, positioned in ways that suggest awareness of their surroundings and their role within the space. This isn't a random occupation, it's coordination, and that coordination turns every encounter into something more than just a fight. It feels like you're disrupting something structured, something that has been functioning without interference for a long time. The presence of thralls reinforces this even further. These aren't just bodies or remnants. They are people who've been pulled into this system, stripped of autonomy, and repurposed. Some of them come from Morthal itself, which ties the cave directly back to the town in a way that feels invasive. This isn't a threat that exists outside the community. It's one that has reached into it, taken from it, and brought those people down here. And that connection is what makes the cave feel so personal. You're not just clearing out enemies, you're uncovering what's been happening to the people of Morthal. That realization shifts the tone completely. Every thrall you encounter isn't just an obstacle, they're evidence. Proof that the threat wasn't contained, that it extended outward, that it affected lives beyond the cave's walls. And because of that, the deeper you go, the more it feels like you're moving through the hidden half of the town itself. A version of it that exists underground, controlled, silent, and completely out of sight. The atmosphere supports this in subtle but effective ways. Unlike caves that rely on chaos or overwhelming danger, Movarth's lair feels restrained. The lighting is low, the sound design minimal, the movement within the cave deliberate. There's no sense of randomness. Everything feels placed, intentional, part of a larger design. That restraint creates tension, because it suggests that nothing here is accidental. Every tunnel, every encounter, every presence, it all serves as a purpose. And that purpose leads back to Movarth. When you finally reach him, the confrontation doesn't feel like climax of a dungeon. It feels like the exposure of something that has been hidden for far too long. He isn't just powerful, he's composed, controlled, exactly what you'd expect from someone who has been operating in secrecy for so long. There's no desperation in him, no sense that he's been cornered. Even in defeat, he feels like someone who was fully in control of his environment until the very end. And that's what makes him unsettling, not just what he is, but how long he's been able to exist without being stopped. That longevity raises questions that the cave itself doesn't answer directly. How many people were actually taken? How long has this been happening? How did it remain hidden for so long in a place as small as Morthal? The game doesn't give you clear numbers or timelines. It leaves you with implications. But if you start piecing those implications together, a clearer and far more unsettling picture begins to form. Movarth isn't just a random vampire. He's a figure with a documented past, known long before the events in Skyrim as a vampire hunter who ultimately became the very thing he once pursued. That alone suggests time. This isn't a recent transformation or a sudden appearance. He's had years, possibly decades, to refine how he operates. And by the time you encounter him in Morthal, he isn't experimenting anymore. He's established. The structure of the cave supports that idea. This isn't a temporary refuge or a recently claimed hideout. The layout, the number of occupants, the presence of both vampires and thralls, it all points towards something that has been building up gradually. Systems like this don't appear overnight. They require time to develop, to stabilize, to function without drawing attention. Every thrall you see represents a moment where someone disappeared, where someone was taken and never returned as themselves. And that's where the numbers start to become uncomfortable. Morthal is a small town. People notice when others go missing, but only to a point. In a place already defined by isolation and unease, disappearances can be explained away. Illness, travel, the dangers of the swamp. It wouldn't take many incidents over a long enough period for a pattern to form without ever being fully recognised as one. One person gone 1 month, another weeks later, spread out enough it doesn't look like a crisis. It looks like misfortune. And that's likely how Movarth kept it hidden. Not by avoiding attention completely, but by staying beneath the threshold where attention turns into action. The thralls themselves reinforce this. They aren't just generic figures. They're evidence of a process. People taken, turned, and repurposed over time. And because they've kept within the cave, removed from the surface, their existence doesn't feed back into the town in a visible way. There are no signs of struggle in the streets, no open conflict, no immediate reason for the guards to investigate further. Everything happens quietly, and that quiet is what allows it to continue. There's also the geography of Morthal itself. The surrounding marsh is dense, fog-covered, difficult to navigate. Visibility is low, movement is slow, and the environment naturally obscures what lies within it. A cave hidden in that landscape doesn't need elaborate defences. It just needs to exist in the right place. People don't wander aimlessly through the swamp. They stick to what they know, what's safe, what's visible. And Movarth operates just beyond that boundary, close enough to reach the town, far enough to remain unseen. That balance is what makes his operation sustainable. He doesn't overextend, he doesn't draw unnecessary attention. He takes what he needs, when he needs it, and maintains control over everything within his reach. And because of that restraint, the system continues, quietly, efficiently, for longer than anyone realizes it. By the time you uncover it, it doesn't feel like you've stopped something new. It feels like you've interrupted something that's been working exactly as intended. And with the resolution of the quest, it doesn't even fully remove that feeling. Movarth is defeated, the immediate threat is gone, but the knowledge of what was happening remains. The town doesn't suddenly feel safe. It just feels aware, like something has been uncovered, but not fully erased. And that lingering awareness is what makes the cave stick, because it doesn't end cleanly. It doesn't reset the environment or restore a sense of normalcy. It just removes one part of something larger and leaves you to consider what else might still be hidden. That's what defines Movarth's lair as one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. Not because of how difficult it is, not because of how many enemies it contains, but because of what it represents. A system built in secret, a threat that operates quietly, a place that doesn't just exist on its own, but connects to something beyond it. And once you've seen that connection, once you understand how close it was to everything else, it becomes harder to look at places like Morthal the same way again. Because if something like that could exist just beneath it, undetected, uninterrupted for so long, then the question isn't just what was hidden there. It's what else might be hidden somewhere else, waiting just out of sight. Lairs Retreat doesn't feel like a dungeon you're meant to clear. It feels like a place you arrive at too late. From the outside, it presents itself as something relatively ordinary. A cave used by bandits, a hideout carved in the rocky terrain, the kind of place you've seen dozens of times before. There's no immediate signal that anything is different. No warning that what you're about to walk into isn't just another encounter, but the aftermath of something far more violent and far more final. And that's what makes it so effective. Because the shift doesn't happen at the entrance. It happens gradually as you move deeper inside and start to realise that this isn't an active stronghold. It's what's left of one. The first signs are subtle, bodies in positions that don't quite line up with normal combat. Equipment left scattered, not looted or rearranged, but dropped. The absence of movement in spaces that should be occupied. At first it feels like you've just arrived after a fight. But the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't a fight in the usual sense. It was a massacre. The bandits who once occupied Lairs Retreat didn't just lose control of the cave, they were overwhelmed. And the cause of that is what turns the entire location into something far more unsettling, the Falmer. Their presence isn't immediately obvious in the early sections, which makes the discovery of what happened feel more like a realization than a reveal. You piece it together through the environment, through the absence of survivors, through the way everything feels abruptly abandoned. And then you see them. The Falmer don't occupy the cave like bandits do. They don't establish a clear territory, don't leave visible signs of organisation that you can easily track. Instead, they move through it in a way that feels invasive, like they've taken over something without fully reshaping it. That contrast between what the cave was and what it has become is where the unease really sets in. Because the structure is still there, but the people aren't. And the way they're gone tells the story. Lairs Retreat isn't a place where the bandits made a last stand. There's no central point of defence, no clear attempt to hold ground. The bodies are scattered throughout the cave, suggesting panic, retreat, and ultimately failure to escape. Some are positioned as if they were caught off guard, others as if they tried to flee deep into the cave, only to run into something worse. That distribution matters, because it shows that this wasn't a controlled confrontation. It was chaos. The Falmer didn't just attack, they surged. And once they did, there was no recovery. That sense of sudden collapse is what makes the cave feel traumatic rather than just dangerous. You're not fighting through a threat that's currently active. You're moving through the remains of something that was already decided. The bandits never had a chance to regroup, never had a moment to stabilise the situation. Whatever happened here happened quickly, and it happened completely. The Falmer themselves reinforce this in how they behave. They don't feel like intruders. They feel like the new baseline. They move through the cave with familiarity, navigating spaces that were never designed by them, adapting without needing to change to the environment. That adaptability makes them feel less like occupants and more like something that spreads, something that fills whatever space becomes available. And that's what makes their presence so unsettling, because it suggests that this wasn't a unique event. It's something that they just do. Lairs Retreat just happens to be one of the places where you get to see the result. The deeper sections of the cave push this even further. As you move through into the areas where the Falmer presence is more concentrated, the environment starts to shift, not structurally, but tonally. The cave feels less like a bandit hideout and more like something reclaimed. The lighting, the sounds, the pacing of encounters, it all becomes more oppressive, more controlled by the Falmer rather than shaped by what came before. And that transition is seamless. There's no clear point where one ends and the other begins. It just happens, which mirrors what likely happened to the bandits themselves. They didn't have a moment where they realised they had lost. They were already losing by the time they understood what was happening. That lack of awareness is what makes the massacre feel so one-sided. This wasn't a battle between equals. It was an encounter between a group that thought it controlled the space and something that didn't need to respect that control at all. The Falmer don't operate by the same rules. They don't need light, don't rely on visibility, don't approach combat in a way that allows for preparation or strategy in the traditional sense. They move through darkness as if it's an advantage rather than a limitation. And in a cave like Lairs Retreat, that advantage becomes overwhelming. For the bandits, the cave was a base. For the Falmer, it was just another environment. And that difference is what determined the outcome. Even the pacing of the cave reflects this imbalance. You don't encounter the Falmer in a way that builds up to climax. You encounter them as a continuation of something that's already happened. There's no escalation, no moment where the threat suddenly becomes clear. It's just there, present, consistent, reinforcing the idea that the cave is no longer what it used to be. That consistency creates a kind of inevitability, because once the Falmer are present, the outcome feels fixed. There's no version of events where the bandits reclaim the cave, no alternative where things stabilise, just a before and an after, and you're standing right in that after. What makes Lairs Retreat even more unsettling is how differently it presents the Falmer compared to other caves they inhabit. In most Falmer locations, places like Blackreach or the deeper Dwemer ruins, the Falmer feel established. They've built around the environment, adapted it, shaped it into something that reflects their presence. You see their structures, their Charles pens, their pathways carved into spaces that already feel ancient and removed from the surface world. Those locations feel like Falmer territory from the start. You enter knowing what you're dealing with, and the environment prepares you for it. Lairs Retreat doesn't do that. It's not a Falmer cave, at least it wasn't. And that distinction matters, because instead of walking into a place defined by the Falmer, you're walking into a place that was taken by them. And that structure still reflects its original purpose as a bandit hideout. The layout hasn't been fully transformed. The environment hasn't been reshaped to suit Falmer life. It's caught in between, partially reclaimed, but not fully converted. And that in-between state is what makes it so much more disturbing. In a place like Blackreach, the Falmer feel like a natural extension of the environment. They belong there in a way that, while unsettling, is consistent. But in Lairs Retreat, they feel invasive, out of place, but not in a way that weakens them. In a way that shows how easily they can take something that wasn't theirs and make it function for them anyway. That adaptability is the real threat, because it means there's no safe boundary, no clear line where Falmer territory begins and ends. They don't need a specific kind of environment to exist. They can spread into whatever space becomes vulnerable. And Lairs Retreat is the perfect example of that vulnerability. A surface-level hideout, a place that should have been relatively secure, overtaken completely by something that didn't need to follow the same rules. That contrast makes the Falmer feel more aggressive here than in their usual environments. Not because they behave differently, but because the context changes how you interpret them. In their own caves, they're inhabitants. Here, they are conquerors. And the cave itself reflects that shift. It hasn't fully become theirs, but it's no longer what it was. It's something in between. And that's what makes it feel so unstable. You don't read about what happened, you see it. And that makes it harder to distance yourself from, because there's no interpretation needed. The evidence is direct, clear, final. The cave doesn't ask you to solve a mystery. It shows you the exact result of one. And that result is absolute. Everyone who was here is gone. And what replaced them isn't just stronger, it's more suited to the space, more adapted, more permanent. That's what makes Lairs Retreat one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. not because of its difficulty, not because of its scale, but because of how completely it captures the moment where control is lost and never regained. It's not a story about struggle, it's a story about being overtaken, about a place that belonged to one group and now belongs to something else entirely. And the transition between those two states is so complete, so irreversible, that it doesn't feel like a change. It feels like erasure. A reminder that in Skyrim, some places don't just fall, they get replaced. And once that happens, there's nothing left to reclaim. Stillborn Cave doesn't try to hide what it is. The name alone already tells you that something went wrong here long before you ever step inside. But even with that warning, nothing really prepares you for how heavy the place feels once you're actually in it. It's not a large cave, not particularly complex, and on paper, it should be a quick stop. Clear the enemies, move on, forget it. But the moment you begin to notice what's scattered throughout its interior, it stops feeling like a standard location and starts feeling like something far more deliberate. Because Stillborn Cave isn't just another Falman nest or animal den. It's a place defined by what's left behind. The first thing that stands out is how quiet it feels. Not silent in a literal sense. There are still enemies, still movement, but quiet in tone. There's no sense of activity beyond what's immediately in front of you. No suggestion that this place is functioning in any ongoing way. It feels static, like everything that needed to happen here already has. And that stillness makes the details stand out more. Because the cave is filled with skeletons, remains of people who died here before. Not in the usual Skyrim way, where bones are scattered as part of the environment or tied to ancient ruins. These feel different. Their placement, their proximity to each other, the way they're grouped, it all suggests that they didn't just end up here randomly. There's a pattern to them, even if it isn't immediately obvious. Some are positioned as if they were together, others as if they were trying to move, to escape, to reach something. And that's where the unease starts to build, because these aren't just remains, they're traces of a moment that didn't end well. The more you move through the cave, the clearer that becomes. There's no sign of a structured settlement, no indication that this was a place people lived in for long. Instead, it feels like somewhere people ended up, a point they reached rather than a place they built. And that distinction matters, because it changes how you interpret what happened here. This wasn't a community that slowly declined. It was a group that arrived and then didn't leave. The presence of the Falmer deeper in the cave adds context, but not in a way that simplifies things. They're part of the environment, part of the danger, but they don't fully explain the arrangement of the skeletons. If anything, they complicate it. Because while the Falmer are clearly hostile, the state of the cave suggests something more drawn out than a single violent encounter. It doesn't feel like a battle. It feels like something slower, something that happened over time. The name Stillborn starts to carry more weight the longer you stay. It's not just a grim title. It feels descriptive, like whatever was meant to happen here never had the chance to fully exist. A group that never established itself, a journey that ended before it could become anything else. There's a sense of interruption to the entire space, like you're looking at something that was cut off before it had the chance to develop. And that creates a very specific kind of discomfort, because there's no resolution, no clear narrative that ties everything together, just an outcome. The skeletons themselves become the focus of that outcome. They're not hidden, not tucked away. They're part of the cave's identity. You can't move through the space without noticing them, without being reminded of them. And because of that, they start to feel less like background detail and more like the central element of the location. They are what define it. And the lack of explanation surrounding them is what makes them unsettling, because you're left to fill in the gaps yourself. Were these travelers, refugees, a group trying to escape something else? The game doesn't tell you. There are no journals, no direct clues, no single piece of evidence that gives you a clear answer. And that absence is intentional. It forces you to engage with the space differently, to look at what's there and try to understand it without being guided. That process of trying to reconstruct what happened without being given a clear narrative is what makes Stillborn Cave stick with you. The enemies are there, but they're not the focus. They don't define the experience. The remains do. because they don't change, they don't react, they just exist. And that existence creates a kind of permanence that's hard to ignore. Compared to other caves in Skyrim, which often revolve around a central story or a specific event, Stillborn Cave feels more fragmented. It doesn't present a complete picture. It gives you pieces and leaves the rest up to you. And because of that, the story you build in your head can end up being more unsettling than anything the game could have explicitly shown. That ambiguity is what gives the cave its impact, because it never fully resolves. You leave with the same questions you had when you entered, just with more context, more detail, more reason to think about them. Even the scale of the cave contributes to this. It's not expansive, not layered in the way larger dungeons are. Everything is relatively close together, which means the details aren't spread out. They're concentrated. You don't have long stretches of empty space between discoveries. Everything is immediate, present, unavoidable. And that makes it harder to distance yourself from. You can't just move past it, you have to move through it. The Falmer presence, while secondary to the overall tone, still plays an important role. They represent the current state of the cave, the continuation of something after whatever originally happened has already concluded. They don't explain the past, but they define the present. And that contrast between what was and what is adds another layer to that unease, because it suggests that the cave didn't just end. It was taken over, reused, repurposed. And whatever happened to the people who were here became part of the environment, something absorbed into the space rather than removed. When you compare Stillborn Cave to other traumatic caves in Skyrim, what stands out isn't just what happened, but how little of it is explained. In places like Tolvold's Cave, the trauma comes from unraveling a clear sequence of events. An expedition enters, paranoia builds, everything collapses within. You follow that descent step by step, almost reliving it as you move deeper. In Movarth's lair, the horror is structured, controlled. There's a system behind it, a clear cause and effect tied to a single figure pulling the strings. Lairs' Retreat shows you the aftermath of a violent takeover, a moment where control is lost instantly and completely. Stillborn Cave doesn't give you any of that clarity. There's no defined timeline, no central figure, no single event you can point to and say, this is what happened. And that lack of structure makes it feel more unsettling in a different way. Where other caves guide your understanding, Stillborn Cave removes the guidance entirely. You're not retracing steps, you're guessing them. You're trying to build a narrative out of fragments that don't quite connect. And that uncertainty becomes part of the experience. It also differs in scale and intensity. Tolvold's Cave overwhelms you with complexity and pressure, constantly shifting and disorientating you. Lairs' Retreat hits you with the immediacy of violence, a clear before and after that's impossible to ignore. Movarth's lair unsettles you through connection, tying the cave directly to a town and making the threat feel invasive. Stillborn Cave feels contained, but not in a comforting way, in a way that feels sealed off, like whatever happened here stayed here. It doesn't reach outward, doesn't connect to a larger system, doesn't build into something bigger. It just exists, isolated, holding on to its outcome without explanation. And that isolation is what makes it stand out, because it removes context, it removes resolution. It leaves you with something that doesn't expand the world, it just sits within it, unresolved. Compared to other caves which often feel like parts of larger stories, Stillborn Cave feels like a fragment that was never complete. And that incompleteness becomes its defining feature. It doesn't tell you what to think. It leaves you with just enough to realize that whatever happened here didn't follow a clean narrative. And that makes it harder to process, because there's nothing to anchor your understanding to. No beginning, no clear middle, just an end. And the remains of how it might have happened. That's what sets it apart, not the scale, not the danger, but the absence of explanation. And that absence lingers far longer than any defined story ever could. Everything is constant, unchanging. And because of that, it anchors the entire experience. That's what makes Stillborn Cave one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim, not because it overwhelms you with danger, not because it presents a clear, dramatic story, but because it leaves you with something incomplete. A place where something ended without explanation, where people arrived and never left, where the only thing that remains is the evidence of that outcome. And no matter how long you spend there, no matter how closely you look, that outcome never becomes clearer. It just becomes heavier. Because sometimes the most unsettling places in Skyrim aren't the ones that tell you exactly what happened, but the ones that leave you with just enough to understand that whatever it was, it didn't end well. Darkfall Cave doesn't feel like a place you explore. It feels like a place you descend into, both physically and mentally. From the moment you step inside, there's a shift in tone that sets it apart from almost every other cave in Skyrim. It's not just darker, not just more isolated. It feels removed, like you've stepped out of the normal world and into something quieter, older, and far less defined. And that only deepens the further you go, because Darkfall Cave isn't just a cave, it's a transition. At first, it presents itself simply enough, a cold enclosed space with limited visibility, the kind of environment you've seen before, but almost immediately there's a sense that this place isn't meant to be navigated in the same way as others. The paths don't guide you clearly, the lighting is minimal, forcing you to rely on instinct rather than direction. And the deeper you move, the more the cave seems to open and close around you in ways that feel unpredictable. You're not just progressing, you're slipping further in. That lack of clarity is what defines the early part of Darkfall Cave. Unlike caves that establish a rhythm, enemy, corridor, room, repeat, this one disrupts that pattern entirely. Movement feels slower, more deliberate. You're constantly adjusting, trying to understand the layout, trying to stay orientated in a space that doesn't offer many clear points of reference. And then, just like usual, the Falmer appear. Their presence changes everything again, but not in the way you might expect. In other caves, Falmer encounters feel aggressive, immediate, designed to overwhelm. Here they feel quieter, more integrated into the environment. They don't just exist in the cave, they belong to it. They move through it with familiarity, navigating darkness and terrain with ease while you struggle to keep up. That contrast creates a different kind of tension. You're not just fighting enemies, you're out of place. The Falmer aren't the only threat though. Charles lurk deeper within, adding another layer of unpredictability that keeps you from ever feeling settled. Their sudden appearances, their movement through the environment, it all reinforces the idea that this cave isn't structured for you. It's structured around something else, something that existed here long before you arrived. And as you move further in, the cave begins to change, subtly at first. The tight and closed space begins to open up. The darkness shifts, giving way to faint light. The environment transitions from oppressive to something almost surreal. You start to hear water, see reflections, notice details that weren't present before. And then eventually, you reach the Forgotten Vale. That moment is where Darkfall Cave reveals what it really is. Not just a location, but a passage, a boundary between one space and another. And that transition is what makes it so unsettling, because everything leading up to it feels like a descent into something unknown, something disconnected from the rest of Skyrim. And when you finally emerge into the Vale, the contrast doesn't feel like relief, it feels disorienting. The open space, the light, the scale of the area, it all comes so suddenly that it's hard to process. You don't feel like you've arrived somewhere new. You feel like you've crossed into something differently entirely. That shift recontextualizes the entire cave. It wasn't just a dungeon you cleared. It was a path you followed, one that led you somewhere you couldn't have reached any other way. And because of that, everything inside the cave takes on a different meaning. The darkness isn't just atmosphere, it's separation. The confusion isn't just design, it's transition. The enemies aren't just obstacles, they're part of the boundary. And that boundary is what makes Darkfall Cave one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. Not because of what happens inside it, but because of where it takes you. That sense of transition becomes even clearer when you compare Darkfall Cave to places like Gloomreach and Chillwind Depths. Because both of these caves approach Falmer territory in a completely different way. Gloomreach, for example, is expansive, open in a subterranean sense, and filled with bioluminescent mushrooms that create an eerie but strangely readable environment. You can see where you're going, you can understand the scale of the space. Even though it's dangerous, it feels established. like a place that exists on its own terms, with a clear identity and a visible ecosystem. The Falmer there feel rooted. They've adapted the environment, built around it, and made it their own in a way that feels almost stable, even if it's hostile. Chillwind Depths operates similarly, though in a more enclosed and oppressive way. It's darker, tighter, and more suffocating, but it follows a recognizable structure. You descend deeper, encounter stronger resistance, and gradually uncover more of what lies beneath. The presence of Falmer and Charles builds in intensity, but it's consistent. You understand the progression, even if it's uncomfortable. It feels like a place you're meant to conquer, step by step, layer by layer. Darkfall Cave doesn't follow either of those patterns. It doesn't feel established like Gloomreach. It doesn't feel structured like Chillwind Depths. Instead, it feels in between. Where Gloomreach invites you to observe its environment, and Chillwind Depths forces you to push through it, Darkfall Cave keeps you uncertain the entire time. Visibility is limited, but not in a way that creates straightforward tension. It creates disorientation. The paths don't clearly signal progression, and the environment don't stabilize long enough for you to feel like you've adapted to it. And the Falmer reflect that difference. In Gloomreach, they feel like inhabitants. In Chillwind Depths, they feel like defenders. And in Darkfall Cave, they feel like part of the transition itself. They don't just occupy the space, they reinforce its instability. They appear in ways that feel less predictable, less tied to territory, and more tied to movement. You don't get the sense that you're clearing areas or gaining control. You're just passing through spaces where they already existed. That lack of control is what separates Darkfall Cave from the others. In both Gloomreach and Chillwind Depths, there's a sense that you're progressing towards something, an endpoint, a goal, a resolution. The caves feel like complete experiences, contained within themselves. Darkfall Cave, on the other hand, never feels complete on its own. It feels like part of something larger, something that extends beyond its boundaries. And that's what makes it so different, because it's not trying to be a destination, it's trying to move you somewhere else, which makes everything inside it feel less like a challenge to overcome, and more like a space you have to endure long enough to pass through. It doesn't tell you a story, it literally puts you inside one. And that story isn't about survival or conflict, it's about movement. About leaving one place and arriving in another, without fully understanding what lies between them. That's what lingers, not the enemies, not the layout, but the feeling of crossing something, of moving through a space that exists not for its own sake, but as a connection between two worlds. And once you've experienced that, it changes how you see caves in Skyrim, because it shows that they don't all serve the same purpose. Some are destinations, some are challenges, and some, like Darkfall Cave, are something else entirely. A passage, a threshold, a place that doesn't just exist on its own, but exists to take you somewhere you weren't meant to reach easily. And that's what ultimately makes it traumatic. Not because it overwhelms you, but because it removes your sense of control, your sense of place, and replaces it with something uncertain, something transitional, something that doesn't fully belong to the world you thought you understood. And by the time you come out the other side, you don't just feel like you've completed a cave. You feel like you've passed through something that changed the space around you and your place within it. Skyrim is a land built on myth, power, and conflict. Its mountains are tall, its holds proud, and its ruins ancient. But beneath its snow-covered peaks and stone cities lies a darker world, a world of secret rituals, forgotten gods, and the remnants of people who have never truly let go of their old forbidden faiths. Among these shadowed places, none are quite as unsettling as Wolfskull Cave. Hidden in the cliffs west of Solitude, Wolfskull Cave is more than just another dungeon. It's a wound in the world, a reminder that even the proud and orderly imperial capital is built on something twisted and restless. Inside, necromancers gather, chanting in the dark, their voices echoing through the hollow bones of the earth. Their goal? To bring back Potema Septim, the Wolf Queen of Solitude, a woman so vile, so consumed by ambition and death, that even in death she refused to stay gone. To understand why Wolf Skull Cave is so disturbing, one must first understand the figure whose legacy it preserves. Potama Septim, the Wolf Queen. Potama was not merely an evil ruler. She was a force of nature, a storm in human form. The daughter of Pelagius II and the aunt of the Emperor Uriel Septim III, she manipulated the very empire from within, sowing chaos in pursuit of power. Her reign of influence was one of deceit, war, and black sorcery. Even in death, her name lingered like a curse, whispered through the catacombs of solitude. The legends say she could speak to the dead. Others claim she fed on their souls. When she finally died, her body was entombed deep beneath solitude. But her spirit, her will, refused to fade. Centuries later, necromancers sought to bring her back, choosing Wolf Skull Cave as the place of her resurrection. The choice was deliberate. This cave, carved into the bones of an ancient hill, feels alive. The walls breathe, the air hums with magic, and every echo sounds like a whisper. It's a place where death never truly rests. What makes Wolf Skull Cave so unsettling isn't what happens inside, it's where it is. The cave sits just west of Solitude, the capital of Skyrim, a city ruled by imperial authority, guarded by soldiers and seen as a beacon of order and civilization. Yet mere minutes from its gates lies a pit of blasphemy, a necromantic cult openly conducting rituals to resurrect a centuries-old queen of evil. The proximity is disturbing. It suggests that darkness in Skyrim is not distant. It thrives right under the noses of the powerful. While nobles feast in the Blue Palace and merchants trade in Solitude Square, the dead are being awakened in the hills nearby. It's this contrast between civilization and corruption that makes Wolf Skull Cave so haunting. It's not just a place of danger, it's a reminder that Skyrim's peace is fragile, its light barely holding back the shadows. When the Dragonborn enters Wolf Skull Cave during the quest The Man Who Cried Wolf, they find something few players forget. Deep inside, a massive cavern opens, a chasm lit by blue magical fire. Necromancers stand on platforms carved from stone, chanting in unison, their voices weaving through the air like smoke. Lightning crackles, bones rattle, and in the center, above a pit of spectral energy, a ghostly figure begins to form. "Return, O Wolf Queen, return to us," they cry. This is the summoning of Potama, a ritual of resurrection so powerful it shakes the very cave itself. The player witnesses the spectral outline of her spirit, clawing her way back toward the mortal realm, her laugh echoing across the stone walls. Even when the Dragonborn disrupts the ritual, it's too late. The ritual succeeds partially. Potama returns as a restless spirit, her essence scattered across the crypts of Solitude. Unlike many of Skyrim's caves, Wolf Skull Cave feels deliberate. It's not a mine nor a natural tunnel system. It does feel built, as though someone long ago carved it out with intention. The stone is unnaturally smooth in places, and certain chambers bear the marks of old rituals. Torches flicker blue, chains hang from the ceiling, ancient runes faintly glow when light passes over them. It's unclear whether the necromancers chose this cave for its seclusion or because it was already tainted. Some believe it was once a temple to Daedric forces, possibly Molag Bal or Namira. Others think Potama herself may have used it during her lifetime as a site of dark experiments. Whatever the truth, its architecture tells a story. This place was meant for worship, for sacrifice, and for secrecy. The deeper you go, the more it feels like the mountain itself wants to swallow you whole. Wolf Skull Cave is filled with sound, whispers, wind, the hum of necromantic energy. But there's something else, something quieter, yet more disturbing. Presence. When walking through its corridors, players often describe feeling watched. The shadows seem thicker than they should ever be. The chanting doesn't always stop when you defeat the necromancers. Sometimes, even after the ritual ends, Faint echoes of her laughter can still be heard. This isn't imagination, it's environmental storytelling. The designers of Skyrim created Wolf Skull Cave to feel haunted. Even without ghosts or monsters, the atmosphere alone creates unease. The lighting is pale and sickly, the geometry is claustrophobic, funneling you ever downward. The air is filled with faint dust motes like ash. It's as if the cave itself resents your presence, as though you are trespassing in a sacred tomb that wants to remain undisturbed. Although the player stops the initial summoning in The Man Who Cried Wolf, Potter's resurrection cannot be undone. Later, during the quest, the Wolf Queen awakened. You must enter her catacombs beneath Solitude to finish what the necromancers began, to destroy what they revived. This narrative thread, however, always leads back to Wolf Skull Cave. It's where it started. It's where the boundary between life and death was first perceived. What's chilling is that even though you cleanse Solitude of Potter's influence, Wolf Skull Cave remains. The necromancers may be dead, but the energy lingers. The torches still burn. The cave never resets to normal wildlife like other dungeons. It remains forever marked as though the ritual carved a scar into the land itself. Wolf Skull Cave is no longer just a location. It's a symptom of something deeper, Skyrim's inability to let go of its past. Why Wolf Skull? The name itself carries weight. Wolves in Nordic mythology are creatures of death and inevitability. They represent the wild, the uncontainable, the devourer of the sun at the end of the world. To add skull to that image creates something doubly grim, a symbol of both savagery and mortality. The Wolf Queen herself embraced that symbol. Her followers often referred to her as the wolf among the sheep, the devourer of kings. In resurrecting her, the necromancers sought to awaken not just her power, but her spirit and her hunger. Thus, Wolf Skull Cave becomes a shrine not just to Pottermore, but to the concept of corruption itself. It's where the civilized world's mask slips, revealing the beast beneath. What truly makes Wolf Skull Cave disturbing is not just its lore, but its psychological weight. It's not filled with jump scares or overwhelming enemies. It's filled with implication. Everything about it suggests desecration. The bones piled high, the blood-stained altars, the ritual chambers echoing with phantom chants. Even when empty, the place feels alive, as though the walls remember the horrors committed within them. Skyrim has many dangerous dungeons, but few feel as morally wrong as Wolf Skull Cave. Here, death isn't just an accident of war or survival, a deliberate perversion of the natural order. That makes it one of the most disturbing locations in all of Skyrim, not because of monsters, but because of human evil. Wolf Skull Cave stands as one of Skyrim's most disturbing locations because it's not about what's alive, it's about what refuses to stay dead. Potter's laughter may have faded, her bones may have crumbled, but her spirit lingers in the darkness. The cave remains silent and waiting, like a wound that never quite closes. Skyrim is full of monsters, bandits and beasts, but only in Wolf Skull Cave does evil feel so human. And that is what makes it truly terrifying. Wolf Skull Cave is not just a place of death. It's a reminder that in Skyrim, some nightmares don't end, they endure. When you look at all of these caves together, what really stands out isn't just how dangerous they are, it's how differently they leave an impact on you. Because traumatic in Skyrim doesn't come from difficulty alone, it comes from what you walk away thinking about after you've left. Some caves overwhelm you with pressure. They confuse you, wear you down, make you feel like you're losing control the deeper you go. Others hit you with the aftermath of something that already happened, places where the story is finished, and all that's left is the evidence of how badly it ended. And then there are caves that don't give you answers at all. They leave gaps, fragments, just enough for you to understand that something went wrong, but not enough to ever fully piece it together. That's what makes them stick. Because you're not just fighting through enemies, you're experiencing something that lingers beyond the moment. One cave might trap you in a slow collapse, where everything falls apart from the inside. Another might show you what it looks like when something is overtaken completely, replaced without a trace of what came before. Some feel personal, small, contained, while others feel like transitions, like you're passing through something that isn't meant to be understood in a single visit. And the key thing they all share, they don't resolve cleanly. You finish them, you leave, but they don't feel finished. There's always something left behind, an image, a detail, a question that doesn't quite settle. And that's what separates these caves from the rest of Skyrim. Most locations are designed to be completed, understood, moved on from. These aren't. They stay with you because they don't give you closure, because they rely on you to connect the dots, to interpret what you saw, to sit with the implications, instead of being told exactly what to think. And once you've experienced enough of them, it changes how you explore the rest of Skyrim. You stop rushing, you start paying attention. You notice details you might have ignored before, because you realize that some of the darkest parts of Skyrim aren't hidden behind bosses or locked doors. They're hidden in plain sight, in spaces between fights, in the things the game doesn't explain, and in the quiet realization that sometimes the most traumatic places aren't the ones that challenge you the most, but the ones that leave you with something you can't quite shake, even after you're gone.